Hello Internet, it's been another week. I just had my peanut butter panda puffs. Means I'm ready to talk some comics, so let's get right into it. Today's going to be an extra special day for celebrating breaking 100 and then actually 200 subscribers since the last video. I'm going to be doing a giveaway actually of one of the books that I'm talking about today. So stick around to the end of the video and there'll be instructions on how you can win. And I'll be randomly selecting somebody and announcing it next video, and then I'll be contacting you, getting you information, and we will move forward with getting these awesome books into somebody's home out there. Hopefully somebody who doesn't have them already. Today we're going to go back to the review style, since I haven't done one of those in a while, and I really like talking about it. But it's not going to be a single book. I'm actually going to be doing a creator spotlight today of these 4 books by one of my favorite authors, Jeff Lemire. Many of you out there might know Lemire's stuff more recently for his work with DC. I believe he's actually going to be writing the X-Men book for Marvel in like the all-new, all-mega, all-whatever different relaunch that they're doing. But he wrote a series for DC and Vertigo, like Animal Man and I believe a Justice League series, which were pretty popular. But we're actually going to pull back the clock a little bit and look at his indie and creator comics, more graphic novels actually, that he published before he became a mainstream creative force that he is now. So, Mr. Jeff Lemire is a Canadian illustrator and writer. He grew up, I believe in one of these books, actually Essex County, it talks about he grew up in Essex County, which is right outside of Detroit, so sort of the border of the US and Canada. And in a lot of these books, he's shown playing hockey or having sort of like pictures of hockey uniforms on, and actually one of these especially deals with hockey and Canadian ethos quite strongly. So he is a Canadian creator. Like I said, right now he's very popular in mainstream stuff, but up before that, sort of the decade before he became popular, he put out a number of books that we're going to look at, which are these 4 graphic novels. If you watched the info on collecting video I did, thank you very much, I appreciate you watching it. But you'll remember that I talked about graphic novels as being something that is not collected anywhere else. So these were not individual issues that came out. These were books that Lemire did as just contained graphic stories, and I think most of them benefit from that. His style on these especially is very much one of kind of sustained. It sort of has a doomy gloominess about most of these stories, but it really works well reading and sitting down in one chunk and not waiting for stories to come out on a month-to-month basis. So these are his 4 graphic novels we're going to be talking about today. 3 of them produced by Top Shelf Entertainment and 1 by Vertigo, which is what he did a lot of work for sort of in the middle range of his career, but this is mostly covering his early to mid-career. So book number 1 we're going to mention is Lost Dogs, and this was his first Top Shelf publication. Top Shelf is a small indie press. I believe they're based in Atlanta, and I think now they are a branch of IDW. But at the time that this and this other stuff I'm going to talk about was published, I don't think they were owned by IDW yet. They were their own publishing house, similar to something like Pantheon Books is what I would compare them to, who do like Mouse and Black Hole, where it's kind of these mostly graphic novel-based indie creator-driven stuff, whereas their parent company now, IDW, does a lot of licensed series, like Transformers and G.I. Joe and a few other things. So this is kind of the indie graphic novel side of IDW, and Top Shelf has put out some awesome stuff. I would, recommend picking up anything you see by them, or at least looking through their catalog and seeing if there are creators that interest you, because their production value and everything is really, well, top shelf. So this first book, like I said, is Lost Dogs. This particular copy is actually a reprinting, sort of almost a remastered version that Lemire put out a couple years ago, because the original one he talks about in this was like a really, really small, I think he paid for it, or it was a very, very small print run, and it wasn't the highest quality, and I think the lettering and everything was kind of shoddy. So he talks about in the afterwards in this that this is the kind of mass market available version, and I imagine if you find one of the old Comic-Con prints that he did, it's probably worth a little bit more money. At least this is just a $10, $15 book tops, but a really excellent short little read. So it has on the front just this dark black cover, and then a picture of the sailor, who is the main character of this, and then on the back it goes with this red and white motif, which is something, actually on the front the letters are in red and white, and so that motif is present throughout this entire book. Hopefully I can show you this without spoiling too much of it, but this book is very, 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 very dark. It's very rough in its style, and Lemire talks about in the afterwards or the forewords, I don't remember, how this for him was kind of his breakout work, not in the sales or setting the world on fire sense, but in the sense of defining who he was as a creator and especially as an artist. His style in all of these books, which he writes and draws, everything I'm going to talk about today is also drawn by him, is very, very impressionistic. It is black and white. All of these are black and white, except, like I said, the sailor's outfit is red and white. But these are all black and white, very stark, very dirty to a certain degree. You can see like ink splatter and stains. It's a very, very rough, sort of like pouring out of him style. And it's definitely not going to be for everybody. If you're somebody who's read, you know, mostly DC or Marvel and are used to the house style, the kind of style that is generally used by fill-in artists or what have you on their main books, this might put you off a little bit, especially Lost Dogs. Lost Dogs is, out of all of these, probably the hardest to get into immediately because it is so rough. He said that it started off as like a 24-hour comic jam where he tried to make a book in 24 hours. Failed at producing the entire book in 24 hours, but the pages that he did do then became this book. So this is only a handful. It's 100 pages, almost exactly. It's a really, really brutal and depressing story of this sailor, this man, this gigantic farmer who lives out in the countryside with his wife and his daughter. And it's basically just a story of their trip to town and all of just the terrible stuff that happens to them as they go into this city. And I can't say anything else without spoiling the rest of it, but suffice it to say that it's not a cheery book. It's very dark, it's very bloody, and the pictures are all very kind of... His body proportions in this are more misshapen and more impressionistic and less realistic than they become later in some of the other books. But it's an interesting look into his very early creative life. Everything about this book is rough. It's, you know, the dialogue is fine. The art in it is very, very, you know, passionate and quickly done and rough and just dirty. If you're interested in something that's really, really depressing, it's a good read, but I think the thing about this is that the suffering or the sadness or the depression, which is kind of a theme that goes through Lemire's works, in this it's much more obvious. And when you read it, you'll understand what I mean. It's just much more smacking you in the face with what's wrong with this man's life, and it's not as interesting or subtle because of that. So it's a cool examination of early Lemire, but if you haven't read any of his stuff, I wouldn't recommend jumping in on this one because it might turn you off. So next in his career, Lemire took the money and everything that he did from doing Lost Dogs, this small printing, and he started work on what I consider to be his best piece that I've read, which is Essex County. And this right here is actually the slipcased San Diego Comic-Con 2015 exclusive, which I was really, really happy to pick up. There were not many of these made. This is a really nice version of the book, and it comes signed and numbered by Lemire out of 500. There is also a sketch version, but it's twice the price. This was $75, and the sketch one is $150. So, actually, I did not go to San Diego Comic-Con, you know, obviously, but it was still available on Top Shelf's website as of a few weeks ago, so I'll try to link it below and see if there's any left. It's also available in just a standard softcover and a hardcover as well without the slipcase, but I don't think the hardcover is widely around. Most people, if you're going to pick it up today, will probably just grab the soft cover that's like $20-something. And this book, to me, is the sweet spot in Lemire's career, where he still has the rough sketchiness and impressionistic qualities of Lost Dogs, but the story and the characters and everything about it is so much more refined, so subtle, and really heartbreaking in its execution, and it's just excellent. It's just one of my absolute favorite, barring graphic novels or regular novels or anything, it's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I love, love, love this thing. It's not too long. I reread it for this review, and I trucked through it in, 2 days, and depending on your reading speed, it could be faster or slower. This book is essentially a story of a number of different families and individuals and their intersecting lives in this Canadian county, Essex County, which is the same place that Lemire grew up, but it's obviously a fictionalized version of that. And so it deals with growing up, growing old, isolation in the sense of being alone on a farm, isolation in the sense of being in the middle of a city of people and not being able to connect with anyone. It deals with, basically, in my opinion, this entire book is about the inability of people to communicate and the suffering and problems that come from the lack of communication that a lot of these characters have. It's, once again, very melancholic, but it's not as brutally dark as Lost Dogs. There's not, any scenes of crazy violence or anything like that. It's instead sort of this long, slow burn as you see these characters progress through their lives, and some of them you grow older with, like I said, and some of them you just see them sort of developing their identity as kids, like this guy right here. And the whole thing is just devastatingly sad, which is not to say it's bad because of that. I really like it because of that, but it's one of those things like, if you've ever seen the movie Dear Zachary, you'll know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, you should go watch that, where it's a piece of work where you'll finish it and it will leave you, in my opinion, really rocked and thinking about the choices you've made or the people that you have relationships with, and how, this book illustrates the problems that can happen through those relationships, things you might need to fix, or things you might, want to change the way you interact with somebody, because this kind of shows how it could go if you let these things fester and burn and never address any of them. And once again, the art style on this is very impressionistic, black and white. It's not nearly as rough as Lost Dogs was. It is a much cleaner style. There are still some kind of speckles and ink blots and little things like that, and sometimes he purposefully draws in this almost childish style to illustrate one of the characters' drawings, because the little boy in this, although it's not specifically named, he's not named Jeff or anything like that, it's definitely kind of a representation, I think, of him growing up in this time in Canada. And so there's a lot of, like I said, kind of hockey, there's a lot of interesting pieces where he kind of parses apart the stereotypes or maybe the feelings that he has about the way people in this part of the country interact with each other. And he does a really, really, really excellent job of illustrating this in a very cinematic way. And part of that is because he actually went to film school, which he talks about in one of the afterwords to these books. He attended film school and ended up, I don't know if he dropped out or finished and then moved on to comics, but you can really tell in a lot of, especially I think this book and the next one I'll talk about, where these shots that he has are very cinematic, and he sort of positions everything in a way that is easy to read and still embraces comics as a medium where you can show kind of these surrealist or unrealistic pictures. It's not like he sticks to, realism to tell this slice of life story. Instead, he kind of brings in surrealism or different elements of fantasy to kind of enhance the way that you interact with these characters, and it's just really brilliantly done. Not the most uplifting read in the world, but it will really kind of make you reevaluate the way that these characters interact and the way that you interact with people. And I think if you have to pick one thing from Lemire's collection to read, I would highly, highly recommend picking up Essex County, because I think it just is fantastic for people who like graphic literature or who don't like graphic literature. It's a really great starting point to read comic books and graphic novels. It's just an absolute must-read. Completely recommended. Go pick it up without any reservations. Doesn't matter if you're old or young or into different comics or not, or male or female or whatever. I think this crosses all the boundaries of comic book fandom, and it should be read by anybody who's remotely interested in graphic literature. And from Essex County, we move on to two different books which, in my mind, are almost companion pieces. This one is The Underwater Welder, which is his last top-shelf publication for now. And then this one is The Nobody, which was his Vertigo graphic novel that was put out, I think, around the time that he was writing Sweet Tooth, another Vertigo series that he was on. And these books, I say they're companions because they feel like they are his attempts with The Underwater Welder to do, like it says on the back cover, a sort of Twilight Zone-esque science fantasy take on his kind of normal human interaction suffering tales that these other ones are. And then this is almost like a EC Comics, like weird science, weird tales kind of thing, where it feels like it's meant to be a blown up issue of these kind of short story allegory things. So The Underwater Welder is interesting because I think it has probably the best straight up artwork from Lemire. It's, again, in this, his style is very much his own. If you didn't dig any of the other ones, you won't dig this either, but I still would highly recommend trying to jump into it. Except in this one, it uses a lot more subtlety of ink washes, and it's all black and white, but there's different it flashes back and forward between this man's childhood and his adult life, and in these flashbacks, it uses different sort of shades of gray and black and white to show you where he is at this point in his life. And it's really, really excellently done. It's a very, very cool, like I said, Twilight Zone take on the kind of sins of the father plot device, where this man who is an underwater welder is kind of sucked back into this town that he grew up in, and is unable to escape the ghost of his father, who is also a deep-sea diver. And it kind of goes through his journey as his wife is about to give birth to their son, of understanding his father, seeing him from a perspective of a child, and then being able to ultimately to see his father from the perspective of an adult and kind of realize the things that he's been chasing, or the faults that his dad had that he wasn't able to see before, and kind of let all of that go. So it's not particularly long, and it basically takes place over the course of like one specific night, kind of like Lost Dogs did, and almost like The Nobody does. Instead of Essex County, which has this kind of multiple cast of characters and this building of all of this mythology of this town, this really just takes place in this one guy's mind and the kind of the town and the image of it that he's constructed as a child and as an adult. So it's really, really well done. It's the art in it, I think, is the most immediately approachable out of any of these books. And if you're into, as I keep saying, Twilight Zone or sort of these mystery thriller books, this is the one that I would highly recommend jumping in on, because it's a very, very appealing art style, tied into a really, really interesting story where the resolution ties itself up nicely. This is a really mature work, I think, more so than something like Lost Dogs, where it's kind of just get this on the paper. This one feels like it takes its time to build in these subtle pushes, and then even though it's a quick resolution, it's not a long burn or anything, it does really grab you and sort of show you what this character has gone through in a way that's much more meaningful than some of his earlier stuff. And then lastly, we have this Vertigo graphic novel, The Nobody, which I think is probably, to me, the least interesting of all these books that he's put out, because even though I'd say it's more refined and probably a better, whatever that means, book than Lost Dogs, I think it's too long for its own good at just, 60, 70 pages. It basically feels like, I said, like a 8 to 10 page kind of EC Comics twist story, but stretched out to graphic novel length, and I don't think it really benefits from that. It's basically about, as you could probably guess, this bandaged man who rolls into, another small town and stays over in this town trying to hide from his past, and it's about how the townspeople interact with him and how his past catches up to him. So it's nothing particularly special in the story department. Most of the beats and the twists are relatively predictable, and it doesn't really, in my opinion, reveal or add anything more than the kind of standard wandering stranger story might in these other small anthologies. But, again, it's Lemire artwork. It's done in this really beautiful two-tone kind of black and light blue art style, which, I personally can't get enough of his stuff. I love the way he draws people, and I love that it is not, a necessarily realistic portrayal, but it is a very highly stylized portrayal. But I think out of all of the books, The Nobody is probably the one that you could skip or only read if you're a hardcore fan, because it doesn't really push any boundaries or offer anything that these other books do. Overall, my whole intent with making this video was to show, now that in the future months, Lemire is about to be a Marvel writer with X-Men, and he has been a premier DC writer. He has his hands in everywhere. He writes a little bit for Valiant as well. Now that he is becoming so well known for his writing, it's really a good time to go back and familiarize yourself with his artistic style as well, because with most of these books, like X-Men, he doesn't draw the art on them, which would be awesome. I would love, love, love to see a mainstream X-Men book with this style of art. But for most of the stuff with DC and Marvel, he's going to be doing just the writing duties on it. So these 4 graphic novels, these kind of pieces that he constructed himself from the ground up totally, now is an awesome time to go back and find those, familiarize yourself with his style and kind of the melancholic and really human-level suffering approach that he takes on a lot of these. They're not grand-scale, huge operatic works where you are understanding the secrets of the universe or something like Grant Morrison or Alan Moore. It's much more of a human-level slice of life with mixtures of kind of science fantasy or fantastical elements, but it's ultimately about the way people treat each other and the way that they are able to communicate or not communicate and how that affects their lives and their relationships with other people. They're really, really well done. He definitely has a unique voice and something to say with all of these books, and if I had to recommend any of them, I would say Essex County and Underwater Welder. Absolutely go read, pick them up, regardless of if you are a fan of this style. And then The Nobody and Lost Dogs maybe are sort of next steps that you can take if you find that you're interested in those other 2 books to kind of dig a little deeper into Jeff Lemire's stuff. And like I hinted at the beginning of the video, I'm actually going to be giving away the softcover copy of Essex County. So because I now have this awesome slipcase hardcover, I don't need the softcover anymore. So if you are a subscriber to my channel, then good, you are already entered, because the criteria for winning this is just to be a subscriber. Right now I have about 200 subscribers. I'm hoping that I can get a couple more by the time next week rolls around. So if you are a subscriber, good. Just listen back and next week, and I will be posting the video with the winners. And if you're not a subscriber, please, please, please click that subscribe button, and you'll be automatically entered to win the softcover trade copy of Essex County, which is going to be an awesome read for you if you haven't read it. And if you do win it, having already read it, maybe you can find somebody else to give it to expand the gospel of Jeff Lemire. As always, if you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you subscribed, hit like, dislike if there was something that you didn't love about it. Please leave me a comment if you're into Jeff Lemire or any other kind of indie creators like him. You know, I am always looking for different things to read and places to go with this style. So follow me on Tumblr if you'd like to keep up with some stuff that I post there. And I will see you guys next week with some more comic videos. Talk to you then.